I'm Time Senior Editor Sean Gregory, and I'm back with Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred. Rob, thanks so much for joining us on Time 100 Talks.
Thanks, Sean.
Rob, if there's one thing we've learned during this time is that bubbles seem to work. The NHL and the NBA, for example, are playing all their games in one or two cities with protections in place, and they haven't seen any positive tests. Baseball is playing its regular season outside of a bubble, and there have been some high-profile COVID outbreaks, particularly with the St. Louis Cardinals and Miami Marlins. Rob, for the postseason, is a postseason bubble a goal for Major League Baseball?
We're engaged in contingency planning with respect to the postseason right now. We haven't made a final decision as to what we're going to do. Part of it will depend on, what happens in the coming weeks. But certainly tighter protocols, more of a bubble type arrangement is something that we're giving consideration to. And it's a lot more workable in the postseason for us, given it would be fewer teams.
But how would you characterize the likelihood of a postseason bubble happening for you guys?
I just can't at this point. I mean, it just depends on how the season continues, the course of the virus, and we're just not at a point in the planning process that I could put a percentage on it.
Are you far along? Just starting, where in the planning process are you?
Oh, we're pretty far along. We're pretty far along. Right. It takes a lot of, look, a bubble is a very difficult thing. And, hats off to, Adam and Gary for being able to pull it off. But we're deep in the process.
And have you consulted with Commissioner Silver and Bettman? Because they've been through this. And if so, what have they told you?
I've been in regular communication with both commissioners throughout the pandemic period. Obviously, we're facing same kinds of issues, and they've been very helpful in terms of sharing the things that have worked for them.
Earlier in the year, during the pandemic, there were reports that there could be a bubble in Arizona or Florida, or maybe both for this season. Mm-hmm. You wish you had instituted a bubble for the regular season.
Let me answer that this way, Sean. We considered the bubble, went through a detailed planning process, and came to the conclusion that it was just not workable for baseball, really for three reasons. First of all, is facilities. We play 15 games a day. Our games are over 3 hours in length on average. It takes, in a good time, an hour in between games to get the field ready for another game. In a bubble format, you would have had even longer delays because of the need to deep clean dugouts, bullpens, and clubhouses. So when you add all that up, you would need at least 6 major league quality facilities in order to play those 15 games on a daily basis. There are not very many places where that would work. You could subdivide into 2 groups, but remember, we have 15 teams in each league. One team would have had been realigned for the 2020 season and a new schedule done. So facilities were a serious problem. Number 2 was numbers. Unlike the sports that are operating in the bubble, we had a huge numbers issue. We're playing with 28-man rosters. We have a taxi squad of 5 to 7 people. You got coaching staffs, another 5 to 7, training staffs, medical staffs, umpires, the people you need to run 6 facilities from a baseball operations perspective, and then broadcast operations people for all 6 facilities. It was just a massive number, and there's a real question as to whether we could even find hotel space that was adequate to cover that large group. And then the last piece was the calendar. Both the NHL and the NBA were in the middle of their season, close to the end of their season. They had to complete the season and then move into the playoffs where the number of teams goes way down. We hadn't played a game. We had to play a credible regular season. It was going to be months in a bubble, and it raises all sorts of issues, not the least of which are, what are you going to tell people in the bubble about their families during that several-month period that they're locked down? I think that the latter issue, the family issue, was one of the principal reasons that the MLBPA came to us and told us that they didn't think the bubble was something the players were prepared to undertake.
Could the family situation, could that change in a postseason bubble?
It could. It could. It's about the numbers at the end of the day. As I said before, obviously fewer teams in the postseason, particularly after our first round. It reduces the number problem, much easier to deal with the family issue, much shorter period of time. So it's one of the reasons that we're back in the bubble planning process.
And just to be clear, there's no regret or wish because in your eyes, the bubble, the Major League Baseball regular season bubble was never feasible.
Well, it's hard to regret something that was not feasible from our perspective. I do appreciate the fact, and I wish it would have been feasible because the experts we worked with were consistent with the experts that are advising the NBA and the NHL that it's the best way to play a season in the safest way and with the greatest likelihood of completing it. We just didn't think it was feasible.
Rob, both the Miami Marlins and St. Louis Cardinals have had serious COVID outbreaks. What evidence did you have from those two cases that made you think continuing the season was feasible and that this just wouldn't keep happening again and again?
Well, I think the principal issue with respect to both outbreaks was we were able to identify how the outbreak began and trace it to a failure to adhere to the protocols that we had in place. If we felt that the protocols had been strictly observed and we were still having outbreaks, that would have been a very different case for us.
So you did an investigation, and what protocols did each team break?
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of each individual team. I will say that the violations involve the things that you would have thought: inadequate social distancing, interactions outside the team atmosphere that were not carefully undertaken, failure to keep on masks, particularly during travel.
Just because fans want to know, do you plan on publicly releasing the information from these investigations?
We really don't at this point. We don't think it serves a useful purpose. The real point of the investigation from our perspective is to understand what happened and make adjustments to the protocols, both in terms of emphasis and enforcement, that allows us hopefully to avoid further outbreaks.
Did you ever come close to shutting down the season?
There was really not an in-depth conversation about shutting down the season. We were focused on understanding what happened, investigating what happened. And once we got to the bottom of it with respect to both situations, we felt that if the protocols had been adhered to in a strict way, we could have avoided the outbreak.
Is there a set watershed level of cases in a certain amount of time that would trigger a shutdown of the season, or is it kind of you have to play it as it goes?
Sean, I think that one thing we've learned, this virus is a formidable and unpredictable foe. As a result of that, it's difficult to draw lines in the sand. We've learned from both the Marlins and the Cardinals situations and other situations where we've played through that it is impossible to have hard and fast rule. Each situation's a little different than the other. I do think it's safe to say if we reached the conclusion that we were putting our players, our other employees at risk because of the number of outbreaks that we were seeing, we would stop the season.
What is your confidence level that Major League Baseball will crown a 2020 World Series champion?
With the caveat that I already gave you, that the virus is difficult and unpredictable, I am cautiously optimistic that we will make it through. We've had 27 teams that haven't had a serious problem, 28 teams that haven't had a serious problem. Our overall positive rate is less than 0.1%. We think our players are safer in the environment in which they're playing than if they were out in the general population. And those facts make me optimistic.
It is undeniable that these outbreaks have shown that players are at risk here during this regular season, and you knew that going in.
Right.
Why has going forward with the season and putting players at risk been worthwhile in your eyes?
I think the easiest way to explain it is the reaction that we've received to our return to play. I've literally had thousands of emails on my private email account, so many of them that we had to divert them somewhere else. I just couldn't handle them, from people saying how important it is to have baseball back as a sign of a return to normalcy. We've also seen some interesting trends in terms of our engagement. Women, Hispanics, groups that have not traditionally made up the bulk of our broadcast audience are watching games in large numbers, particularly on ESPN. And that, I think, is another sign that baseball is important to the effort to get back to some sort of normalcy in the United States.
Rob, it's important to touch on testing. Disease experts have argued that baseball's testing system is flawed. You're not testing players every day, every other day, and tests get sent out to labs. There could be lags in results and delays. Is Major League Baseball's testing system fundamentally flawed?
Our testing program was designed, built based on advice of some of the leading experts in dealing with pandemics. They've given us every assurance that the testing program is up to the job. I think the experience of the 28 clubs that I alluded to before supports that fact. And I really think that the criticism, the idea of doing it every day, we've been told, does not add significantly to the efficacy of the program.
You know, we've seen some quirky things in baseball this year that we haven't seen before. 7-inning doubleheaders, second base in extra innings, a runner starting on second base, universal DH, 16-team playoffs. Are any of these innovations, quirks, in your mind here to stay?
Well, the 16-team playoff is an idea that the owners were interested in way before the pandemic ever hit. It was something we'd had discussions with the Players Association about, and I think that could be a change that stays. The rest of the changes, I want to be really clear about it, the extra inning rule, the 7-inning doubleheaders were done in response to advice that we received from experts about the amount of time that we wanted players together. They thought it was a huge mistake to have players playing 18-inning extra inning games or to play two doubleheaders, or to play a doubleheader during a day, 2 full games. And so those changes I see as an accommodation to the situation in which we find ourselves. And I don't have any strong view that they'll remain a part of our landscape going forward.
Is there one of those that is maybe one of your favorites that you'd like to see going forward?
I think the one that sort of tells the story of change in baseball is the extra inning rule. In general, what happens in our game is when you put out an idea, you get people who are very engaged with the game. It's something different. They react negatively. Our experience has been, if you go ahead, make the change, and let people see what it really looks like, they start to like it. And that's been the case with the extra inning rule. It is exciting. It does add strategy to it, and has been pretty positively received. Having said that, I'm not committed to any of them staying part of the landscape.
You know, just specific to this season with the 7-inning doubleheaders, the Cardinals, for example, which had an outbreak, are making up their season with tons of 7-inning doubleheaders. But it's a very different game. You know, the rotations change, pitching rotations change. You don't get the same amount of time to have a comeback. How is competitive legitimacy maintained when some teams are playing very different type of baseball than others?
Well, everybody is going to play some 7-inning doubleheaders. Trust me on this before the season's over. I fully expect that will be the case. It's not a perfect season. It was never going to be a perfect season. And, you know, it's just an accommodation to the situation in which we find ourselves. We're trying to do the very best we can to deliver to our fans Major League Baseball.
What is your reaction to some of the instances of player protocol violations that we've seen around Major League Baseball?
Well, each situation is different. I think it's important to try to focus on the positive here. Our players in general have changed deeply ingrained behaviors in response to the protocols that were issued in order to keep them safe. There has been situations where emotion, for example, in the case of the fight, got the best of people. We didn't expect it was going to be perfect, but we've done everything we can to try to minimize those situations. We've increased the monitoring of clubs that's gone on from the commissioner's office perspective in order to be a constant reminder to players and other field personnel about how important the little things are, keeping those masks on when you're in the dugout, avoiding the high fives. It's just a constant reminder.
When you did see the fight, which is probably your worst nightmare, what was going through your head, and I mean, I'm just curious the emotions of seeing something that was so obviously unsocial distanced.
Yeah, when something like that happens, all you can do is hold your breath and hope that there was no one transmitting at that particular point in time, because obviously that sort of gathering is dangerous for everyone involved in terms of the spread of the virus.
You have said in an interview recently that players, quote, need to be better. Pitcher Trevor Bauer, for example, has been critical of you in the past. He wrote on Twitter, basically there's too much blame on the players. Blame everything on the players. What's your response to folks who think, players have said this, that you're being too much of the mistakes and the cases are being put on the players' shoulders and blamed on the players? What's your response to that?
Look, players are responsible for their behavior. The whole quote that the line you refer to was picked out of, referred to the fact that we all need to be better. We need to manage better. Players need to be better. We need to be more effective in making sure that the protocols are followed. So the whole quote, not taken out of context, referred to the institution as a whole. Everybody in it, up to and including me, needs to do a better job to make sure that we don't have a similar outbreak.
And does testing need to be better? And might there be a ramping up of testing going forward?
We are testing far more right now than what the protocols would indicate. Whenever we've had a situation where there's any risk at all, we've moved into everyday testing. Even my friend, Mr. Bauer, pointed out that we were using private airplanes in order to not only do testing every day, but to get the results back as quickly as possible. So we are constantly altering what we're doing to make sure that we're providing as safe an environment as possible for the players and that we're proceeding in a responsible way.
There was during the pandemic, at the heart of it, there was a very high profile, contentious labor dispute. And it turned a lot of fans off. As you know, the optics during a terrible economy, owners and players fighting over lots and lots of money. I heard from people, I think there's a lot of people who expressed, concern that, or expressed the opinion that they're done. I mean, even after you guys restarted the season, got a ton of correspondence. Is that a worry that this whole thing, that particular incident, that particular fight might turn fans off long term?
Let me say it this way, Sean. We need to be better than we were in the spring. And, again, that's the broad we. I think that in labor relations, you're going to have disagreements. I think it's really important for us to find a way to work with the MLBPA to avoid those disputes, whether it's during a pandemic or not, becoming public. And we will be better. I think one of the interesting things that's happened since that period of time is we've had a very positive period of working with the Players Association to confront a common difficulty, that is the virus. The communication's been good and the cooperation's been outstanding.
The collective bargaining agreement expires next year. Should fans have hope? What should their level of hope and faith be that there won't be a labor stoppage long term?
I came to work in baseball in 1998 and took over the labor function at that time. We have not had a work stoppage since I came to baseball, in sharp contrast to the history before that. I have every confidence that we're going to find a way to work through whatever economic differences we have with the players and keep the game on the field.
And MLB has started to embrace the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw that on opening day. In particular, the number of African Americans in baseball, playing Major League Baseball, has declined over time, as you know. Mm-hmm. According to one report, about 8.5% of players are Black. Does this worry you, and why or why not?
It is a concern, and it's a concern that predates the recent emphasis on the Black Lives Matter movement. Going back to the beginning of my commissionership, we have gone out of our way to invest in playing opportunities in underserved markets, particularly in African American communities, in order to get more young African Americans playing baseball so that we have more players in the big leagues and we have more fans in the African American community. This is a long-term project, but we've seen some great progress. The last 5 years, 20% of our first-round picks have been African Americans, much higher than our current population, And almost every single one of those players has a touch with a Major League Baseball program that's kept them playing the game.
And why is it so important to up those numbers? Why?
Well, I think it's a general focus on diversity. We want what you see on the field, our product on the field, to look like America. We want to appeal to an African-American audience. And if you don't have African-American players, I think it's a turnoff. And the last piece of it is our history. You know, we are very proud of the role that Jackie Robinson played in changing baseball and in changing America. And if you want to be proud of that role, you have to accept the responsibility that you need to continue to drive for change.
Without any question, this has been an unprecedented, 2020 has been an unprecedented year in the history of sports for a baseball commissioner, particularly. What seemed like ages ago, you handed out discipline in a historic sign stealing scandal involving the Houston Astros, came under fire for not punishing the players who utilized it. You had to shut down your season in the spring, muddle through a contentious labor dispute during the pandemic. You restarted the season outside of a bubble and had very, very quick outbreaks like crazy, had to redraw the schedule. Would you, after going through all this, is there anything you would have done differently in 2020?
Oh, of course, there's things that I would have done differently. I think it's been a very challenging year. I try to learn from each of the experiences that we go through, or that we have gone through. I think that it's important that learning continues to make you better at the job you're doing.
Anything specifically that you would have done differently?
Well, I don't think I want to rehash each and every decision. I'll tell you one thing absolutely for sure. I blame myself for allowing the labor situation to get as public as it did. If you look back, one of the things that we changed when I came to baseball was we didn't bargain in public. Most of the 4 contracts I did, people didn't even know we were negotiating. I think it was an important part of the success that we enjoyed, and I got away from that. I allowed the institution to get away from it, and it was a mistake.
And you talk about the public comments, the season's not going to start. It kind of people went back and forth. So is that the kind of stuff you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, just the entire public narrative about our economic differences, more than that.
There's a lot out there. It's been a tumultuous season. Any kind of final words to some of the noise out there, some of the criticism out there that you want to address before we close up?
Yeah, look, I think the one thought I'd like to leave you with is that whether we've done everything right or perfectly, I think the owners, the players, and baseball as an institution, certainly the commissioner's office, have undertaken a really difficult challenge to try to provide baseball, to try to send a message that we can get back to normalcy. I think we've learned a lot. I think we've taught people some important lessons in terms of what's necessary to return to normal in a responsible way. And I hope when people look back, they see a season that we completed and realize it was worth the effort.
Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred, good luck the rest of the way as you navigate this. And thank you so much for joining us today on Time 100 Talks.
Thanks, Sean.